The views and content expressed on the following program are provided solely for informational and entertainment purposes. They do not constitute legal advice. A podcast is not a substitute for retaining a competent, licensed attorney to advise you on your specific legal situation.
Break the business. Place where clay power into creators. Have fun along the way. Break the business. Doing what it takes. Celebrate success and learn from the mistakes.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the show. It is time for Break the Business, where we empower indie creators and have some fun along the way. I'm Ryan Kairalla, and it is a pleasure to have you here this week. A little despondent on the sports front, I'll have to say. I was holding out hope that this would be the year that the US of A would win in their own sport and take home the World Baseball Classic, but they blew it in the ninth against Venezuela, and so I gotta wait another 4 years, I think it is now, to see if the USA can win it again. I was actually at the game 3 years ago when the USA lost to Japan in the final, and I was sitting on my couch despondent when they lost again to Venezuela, and so that's put me in a bad mood. I really was hoping for a victory there to open up our baseball season. But other than that, we got a lot of great things to be happy about. This is going to be a fabulous show. We are going to be joined in the second segment by Brittany Perry. She is the founder and CEO of the centralized A&R platform and creative marketplace app Gateless. She is a longtime industry executive, has worked for some of the biggest names in music publishing. I know she's going to have some great insight for us. And that's going to be an absolute blast. So we're going to be checking that out in the second segment. We got some cool stories to talk about this week, maybe a little Oscars talk. We'll see how it goes. Let's see where the conversation takes us by first bringing in one of our beloved co-hosts. Always a joy when this gentleman shows up. He's got great insight. He brings it from the business side of things as an accomplished investor and VC man, but is also a terrific musician, being the front man for Gideon King and City Blog. Let us get his perspective in here. Gideon King is joining us. Hi, Gideon. Oh, are you there? Ooh, I don't hear audio from Gideon King. That's what we would call an inauspicious start. Is it just on my end? Abby, do we have audio in general? Do you hear him? Oh, she's waving her hand no. Okay, so I think Gideon's got a... That's so funny because we, just 30 seconds before we went live, I was hearing Gideon in the mic. And of course, once we go live, everything falls apart. But that's been the story of Break the Business lately, because we had that situation on last week's show where we couldn't get any of the interviewers who were interviewing the guest last week, Bobo Burns, to get through. And so the only person, for some reason, the only mic that Bobo Burns could hear was producer Lauren's mic. He couldn't hear Zach Sloan's mic, and he couldn't hear my mic. And for the life of me, I don't know how that happened, because there's really no rhyme or reason to how that could happen, because it's all coming in through one audio feed to the guest. But for some reason, he could only hear producer Lauren. And for those of you who were watching the show last week, you got to have a front row seat to that just complete nightmare that was also quite hilarious, as we managed to get through that interview by feeding questions to producer Lauren in her ear, Cyrano de Bergerac style, while she then posed the questions to Bobo Burns. And it was terrifying, but it also worked out in the end because we had a nice interview. Gideon, do we have you now? Still muted. That's not ideal. Boy, when we do hear from Gideon King, I'm sure he's going to have some great stuff to share with us. I don't know, maybe reset your audio, check the board. I hope we can get him in at some point today, maybe join us on another audio source. I don't know what's going on there. But while we wait for Gideon to get himself situated here, I can talk to you about some of the stories we have this week, and I'll go ahead and get us cooking with our first story. And hopefully by the time, we get into it, Gideon will have his mic situation sorted out, and we'll be able to get his perspective on it, because I'd love to hear what he has to say about this. So it's been an interesting week, viewers and listeners, for defamation claims against artists. and wanted to bring up one that I thought was kind of wild. On March 16th, Zimbabwean comedian Learnmore Janasi was sued by South African composer Lebo M for a viral comedy bit that Janasi made on the 154 Africa podcast. If that name Lebo M sounds familiar, you might know him as one of the composers on the Lion King song Circle of Life. And so in the clip, and we're going to play it for you now with producer Abby's help, Janasi is claiming in the clip that the opening chant in the Lion King song Circle of Life, that again was composed by Lebo M, has a rather unimpressive direct translation into English. And Abby, can you play the clip for us, please?
Do it.
So you sing it like Nansi ngonya bagiti baba ngonya ma.
Say it again. What does it mean?
It means, look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
You're joking. That is not what that means.
That's exactly what it means.
That's what it means. Look, there's a lion.
Oh my God. It's a,
Look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
All right, let's go ahead.
it's
and
a
pull that down.
lion.
So when I saw this clip, because I had a friend of mine send it to me, I did what I did just now, which is I laughed my head off because that's really, really funny. But I also did what probably a lot of people did when they saw that clip, which was, okay, I need to verify this. So I then Googled the opening chant to Circle of Life and saw the English translation, and it wasn't, look, there's a lion, oh my God. The translation was actually, as you could imagine, far more impressive. It was something like, all hail the king, we all bow in the king's presence. It was much more grandiose when translated into English. But obviously, this was just a comedic bit. The fact that it was just comedy and that he wasn't actually, and that Janasi wasn't actually trying to say that this was the translation, did not stop Lebo M from filing a $27 million defamation lawsuit, alleging that Janasi's statements on the podcast were, quote, a fabricated, trivializing distortion meant as a sick joke for unlawful self-profit and destruction of the imaginative and artistic work of the Grammy-winning songwriter. I mean, just really mind-boggling, incendiary stuff. I mean, how you get $27 million worth of damage from somebody saying that your words mean something else when translated into English, I don't know. But I'll say this in Lebo M's to Lebo M's side of the story here. Apparently, ever since this clip has come out, Lebo M has just been kind of dealing with it. Apparently, a lot of people are teasing him and mocking him. When he goes out in public, everybody's just like, oh, all you wrote was look, a lion, oh my God. And so he's saying it is actually kind of personally and professionally devastating for him that this podcast clip was. It has gone viral. I mean, I don't normally consume the 154 Africa podcast, and I still saw this clip. But, it is... So I take Lebo M at his word when he says that it was a devastating impact for him and that it did hurt him professionally. Now, the question that you might have, and certainly the question that lots of people have when this lawsuit got filed, is, does this actually rise to the level of a legal claim? Let's say that Learnmore Janasi knew that what he was saying was false, as he probably did, because it's a comedy bit, and that the real translation of Circle of Life isn't just look, there's a lion, oh my God. Does that rise? And if that in that false statement did cause Learnmore Janasi actionable injury, does that constitute defamation? Is that the sort of actionable defamation where you could actually sue somebody? Could that comedian get sued? And though I'm not a First Amendment expert, I know enough about it to know that this is going to be a pretty difficult case for Lebo M to make. When you make statements like this that are comedic in nature, as this is, that are meant to be not serious, because this is a comedian on a comedy podcast, And when the target of the claim is a notable public figure, this is the kind of stuff where the First Amendment swoops in and usually will protect the speaker from a defamation claim. So in the United States, when you make a potentially false or defamatory statement against a public figure, which is what happened here, the law says that you have to prove that the person that's suing you for defamation, the public figure, has to show what's called actual malice, that the person who's making the speech knew that what they were saying was false or behaved recklessly as to the truth or falsity. And we have some law that suggests that that's a very difficult standard to meet, not only generally, but particularly difficult when it comes to a comedian on a comedy podcast. Generally, the First Amendment wants to protect comedians. It wants to protect people who are making art and doing creative stuff like a comedic bit on a podcast, and doesn't want to clamp down too hard with defamation claims on those people. And so this is going to be a difficult claim to make. I think even if you can get past the defamation side of it, I think it's difficult to be able to show $27 million worth of damage, as Lebo M is arguing here. And so I don't know how that gets put together. And, but you never know with these things. But here's what I think is interesting about this case is not so much the First Amendment claim, but I think what it means for creators and podcasters. A lot of you who are watching this show now, the viewers and listeners out there, a lot of you are podcasters like me, and you have guests on your show like I do every week. And so you might be asking yourself as a podcaster, like, could I get caught in the crossfire if one of my podcasting guests says something that is potentially defamatory, as this allegedly was, at least according to Lebo M? And if you make that kind of false statement, if your guest makes that kind of false statement, could you get roped into a lawsuit? And the answer is probably. I wasn't able to look at the actual text of this lawsuit to see if the podcast itself got named in the lawsuit. I didn't see any article that suggested that it did, but I think that's always conceivable. It's always possible. Whether that claim would succeed is a different question. But as I always tell my law students, it doesn't matter if you get sued, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Once you've gotten sued, you've already lost. Lawsuits are not fun. Being sued isn't fun. It is financially devastating. It is personally difficult to go through. You don't want to get sued, even if the claim is going to be completely frivolous, because it's just not an enjoyable experience. And so, as a podcaster, how can you protect yourself if you're going to be the kind of show that has on controversial guests that might say something defamatory or potentially defamatory, might get those speakers sued, and then that person who's making that lawsuit might name your podcast as well. And so what I recommend to podcasters, especially ones who are going to have controversial figures on their show who might say things that make people angry, is you're going to want to have insurance that can cover that sort of thing. And if you can do it, and this is hard to do, but if you can get the guest as a condition of coming on your show to sign some kind of, like, as part of their release form, some kind of indemnification that basically says, if I say something that gets us sued, I agree to, cover your bills and things like that. And maybe you can get that kind of protection. But I think the other thing to do is to always just kind of be careful about who you bring on your show and make sure you have on people like Brittany Perry coming up in the next segment that are upstanding individuals, that you don't have to worry about them saying something that's going to get you in trouble. Because in the world of podcasting, where, people often feel like to go viral on a podcast, you got to say controversial stuff. There's always the risk of this kind of thing happening. So you always want to be careful of that and mindful of that. And this Lion King lawsuit is a pretty prime example. All right, Producer Abby, can you hop in for a second? Let us know. Talk to me a little bit about where we are with Gideon. Have we come up with a solve here? I'm happy to drive the show solo if I have to, but love to figure out kind of where we might be going with this. Are you there, Abby?
Hello.
Hello. How are you, my dear? I know
I'm
everybody's
doing
saying, where's
great.
producer Lauren? You're producer Abby. For some reason, whenever you're subbing in as producer, it's always an episode where everything goes wrong. And And I'm sorry we keep putting you through that, but thankfully you're sharp as a tack, and I'm not too worried. How are things going behind the scenes? How effed are we right now?
So he's tried re-logging in and tried 2 different microphones, and we're still struggling to get sound to come out. And I've tried maxing it on like the host side, but he's gonna keep trying. I think for now you gotta run solo.
But this isn't just me, right? Like you also can't hear him?
Nobody can hear him. It's coming up
Okay.
as straight nothing.
Okay, I feel better about that then. This isn't just a tech problem on my end, but we just heard from him, right? Like right before we went live, we had this great, fabulous conversation with Gideon King. And then the tech gods just punished us for the second show in a row, by the way, with just some inexplicable microphone issue. We might be cursed as a program producer, Abby.
Yeah, he was just talking about how when people don't show up, it's like a bad sign. And then with like previous episodes, and then now he's gone.
Yeah, this is a disturbing universe. Well, okay, I'm going to try to keep just talking to the crowd. We got plenty of great stories to talk about here, and I can at least get us to the midpoint of the show, at which point we'll bring in Brittany Perry, and hopefully by then our dear friend Gideon will be able to join us. I feel so bad for him because I love Gideon, and every week we have him on, it's always a great discussion. He's so knowledgeable. And he is so dedicated to this show and always has been. He loves us. He brings it every time he's here. He's always prepared. And so I know this sucks for him. And so let us all just give our love to Gideon, who I know this must be just bugging the crap out of him. But we love you, Gideon, and if and when we hear from you this week, we'll have ourselves a fabulous little conversation. But another reason why the defamation issue is interesting to me is because it's coming up a lot this week. In fact, I believe it was just a day or two ago as we record this that another artist has had a pretty interesting defamation thing happen with him. There is a rap artist named Afro Man who you might know him if you're a big rap person, you probably know a bunch of songs from him. But if you're a more casual music fan, you will at least know Afro Man from a song he did about 2 decades ago called Because I Got High, which is a delightful song. I really enjoyed this song like when it came out when I was in like high school or college or something like that. And I remember when Because I Got High came on because my local radio station played it. And the DJ, right after it came on, came back on after the song was over, was killing himself laughing for how funny this song was, and just goes into the mic and says, "My radio station doesn't allow me to play a song twice in a row. That's like the number one rule of our radio station. But I'm going to play this song again because of how funny it was." And then he rolled it right back and we heard Because I Got High again. And I'll never forget that memory. But Afro Man's been around for a long time. And most recently, he's been in the news because some time ago, cops raided his house. They were acting on a search warrant, alleging he had all this criminal paraphernalia inside his house. And, okay, I saw Gideon enter the studio. Do we want to try one more time with Gideon?
Can you hear me?
Yes!
Yeah.
Gideon King, ladies and gentlemen. I never lost hope, my friend.
I kept trying, buddy. I kept trying.
Do we know what happened?
Well, whatever it is, it's all your fault. And
I mean, obviously.
I mean, you're the big guy, and the buck stops with you. So I want your audience to know this has nothing to do with me. Nothing.
It really doesn't. This show is cursed. Like Gideon, last week we had a guest on, and it was me, Zach Sloan, producer Lauren, and the guest. And for some reason, the guest could only hear producer Lauren's mic.
I hate when that happens.
And that doesn't make any sense because it should all be on one audio feed for him.
I hear you, dude.
And so like we had to feed her questions to give to him because I could hear Zach could hear me. America could hear me and Zach. The only person in America that could not hear me and Zach was our guest last week, Bob O'Burns. It was a nightmare. So like, this is just more of like, there's gremlins loose in our equipment and it's just continuing to curse our show for a second consecutive week, but you're back.
Are you talking about this ridiculous lawsuit yet?
Oh, yes. So we started talking about the ridiculous Circle of Life lawsuit. I was starting to talk about how Afro Man is going through something similar right now. But before we talk about Afro Man, I'd love to get your thoughts on this lawsuit. We talked about actual malice and how this is probably not going to fly as a lawsuit under the First Amendment. But how did, when you heard this story, what'd you think of it?
I mean, listen, we have a metastatic cancer spreading through American culture and spreading through the American psyche, and that is polite fictions and the endless culture of sensitivity. It's like the guy's a comedian. You're going to have to prove that he knowingly, willfully transmitted incorrect information, probably to inflict damage. That's going to be super hard. I assume this lawsuit is just going to go away, or they'll settle for some nominal amount. But I mean, do we really need to tie up like well-trained judges and call juries in for this nonsense? I'm not saying that what he did might not have been insensitive. It may have been insensitive, and maybe I wouldn't want to be that insensitive, and maybe you shouldn't be that insensitive. But you know, comedians are kind of insensitive. Like, that's sort of part of what being a comedian is. So the whole thing is completely beyond preposterous. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, do you think I'm wrong? I mean, listen, I just got my audio back, so I want to keep things pretty mellow between us. So like, it's like at any moment, if you disagree with me, I know you're going to cut my audio off again. I know that's what happened.
I assure you, I have nothing to do with whatever audio nightmares this show seems to be experiencing on a weekly basis.
Wait a minute. You should sue me for defamation that I'm suggesting that you would cut my audio off during the radio show. In fact, I feel like a defendant already.
Well, look, Gideon, I agree with you on the law. I think this, I mentioned this while you were, while I had your mic cut off for the first 18 minutes of the show, that this is a pretty weak claim because it's not going to really live, with the First Amendment and everything. No. But I am sympathetic to Lebo M. I believe him when he says that, he's getting made fun of. He's getting teased. Like this song that he obviously cares a lot about. It's it's the most famous thing he's ever written, and I'm sure that particular chant in Zulu, I believe, is something that carries a lot of cultural significance to him. Mm-hmm. And now there's a bunch of people walking around playing this podcast clip, accusing him of basically just phoning in the translation. I could see why he would not like that. Now, I think the lesson here that he missed, that more celebrities need to get better at, is every time you suffer this kind of public setback where you get mocked or teased, it's always better to be in on the joke too. It's a public relations bonanza if you're willing to be in on the joke too. I'll give you my most favorite example of this. About 10 or 15 years ago, Pitbull was collaborating with Walmart, in which they did a promotion where Walmart was going to, put out this public poll and said, pick what city, you want Pitbull to play at a Walmart in your town, right? And the idea is that everybody in your respective towns would want Pitbull to come to your town's Walmart. And so that's how they thought people were going to vote. And once this contest got launched, a comedian realized what the promotion was all about and led a campaign online to have everybody vote for Pitbull to perform at the Walmart in Kodiak, Alaska, to basically force Pitbull to go all the way to some frigid tundra to have to play music at a Walmart that's far, far off. Right. And obviously, it was to mock Pitbull, to make fun of him, make him go somewhere where it's cold. And Pitbull absolutely could have gotten mad about it and canceled the contest and criticized that comedian. And instead, he leaned into it. When Kodiak, Alaska's Walmart won by an overwhelming vote, he happily went to Kodiak. He played at the concert. He invited the comedian with him. to like shake his hand on the Kodiak stage to show what a good sport he was, and played the concert of his life in this like frozen tundra in front of a bunch of Kodiakians. And it wound up getting him a lot of PR points. So I feel like Lebo M could have done something similar here where he could have shown, yeah, I'm in on the joke. Ha ha. That's obviously not what the translation is, but like I'm a good sport about it. And like he could have gotten a lot of goodwill from this. And instead, he's suing the comedian, which generally isn't good from a PR standpoint.
I mean, if you can't beat him, join him, which is somewhat of the moral of your story at some level. I remember in 1994, we care a lot about our work. And I remember I was just starting out on Wall Street. And there was this big stereotypical Wall Street guy smoking cigars. And he said, make me a spreadsheet and do this. So I went in my room and I worked for like 9 days on this spreadsheet. And I walked into his office and I said, here's my spreadsheet. And I was like trembling because I was just getting started. And he looked at it. He said, you're an effing moron. Crumpled my spreadsheet up and threw it across the room and didn't talk to me for the next 5 days. And I remember I called my father. My father was like, get over it. He's like, your work product, it didn't satisfy him. It's not that important. Try and do better next time. Don't be so sensitive. Get over it. I mean, our work is all very important to us. But honestly, how seriously are we going to take ourselves that we can't even let a comedian use some of our material as fodder for what they do for a living? Come on. I mean, let's be serious. Now, I'm being a little bit harsh, I guess, and maybe you're being a little more sophisticated and saying if you can't beat him, join him. But come on, dude. I mean, let's get real.
I mean, that really is the lesson with these kind of things. Like the PR marketplace, time and time again, rewards the people who are willing to be in on the joke.
Oh, totally.
And are very punishing of the people who fight it.
Right.
I mean, almost always, like if you adopt the if you can't beat them, join them philosophy, you're always going to be better off here.
Oh, right.
And we should quickly mention, since I did bring up Afro Man, he's having his own like First Amendment defamation scenario right now, where again, cops raided his house. They didn't find anything, but Afro Man, who had security cameras all over his house, decided to like show clips of the cops going through his house and wrote a bunch of like really mean songs ripping on these cops for, searching his house and not finding anything.
Right.
And the cops sued him for defamation and a bunch of other like, similar speech, civil offenses.
Sure.
And a couple days ago, or maybe yesterday as we record this, a jury came back, that went all the way to a jury, and said that Afro Man wasn't liable. And again, the First Amendment was pretty strong and protective there too, as I think it should be. Because if the First Amendment should protect anything, it's people who are speaking out directly against the government. And that's what cops are. And so like, if it's going to protect anybody, it should be protecting people who are like being, speaking out against cops.
Sure. Why not? Why not?
And particularly in song form, right? Like, protecting creative expression in song is another thing that like cuts right to the core of First Amendment. I'll give you another great Pitbull example. He's something of a First Amendment champion on this. He had his own First Amendment lawsuit about 10 years ago, where Lindsay Lohan actually sued him for defamation because the song "Give Me Everything," one of his number one hits, had a lyric in which he said, "Got it locked up like Lindsay Lohan." And she sued for defamation. She's like, I've never been locked up. This is this is a lie. And that case didn't even make it to a jury, right? It got kicked out on like either motion to dismiss or summary judgment. The lawyers who brought the claim on Lohan's behalf almost got sanctioned for how frivolous the claim was. And basically what the court said there, which I think was driving a lot of the Afro Man case as well, is, we protect creative expression in particular with the First Amendment. Like artistic stuff should be protected.
But there's something else I think that almost, I won't say transcends this legal analysis, and that is comedy. Comedy is a sacred thing for our souls and for our culture. And it's a place where we're taken to and where people can go to feel safe from the excessive safety that is imposed on all of us. And it's a place where we can laugh at ourselves, laugh at others, and take things a little less seriously. And without comedy, as Jerry Seinfeld has said, recently, without comedy, we're kind of lost. We're so serious and so perpetually pre-indignant, so perpetually offended, that it's sort of no fun. And so we really have to give a lot of latitude, I think, to comedians to do what they do, because it's very, very cleansing and very healthy to laugh at others, to laugh at ourselves in a safe way, in the bubble, if you will, of comedy. And almost in a way adopt a posture where there's almost no such thing as bullying in comedy. Now, I know I could get myself in trouble for saying that because bullying is bullying, but I guess what I'm trying to say is let's preserve comedy as a sacred bubble, and let's not start attacking comedians for things they're doing, whether it's funny or not. Let's at least preserve that last bastion of fun in society.
I'm with you on that. And I would say selfishly as a podcaster, I would love to have that kind of wide breadth where everybody's not suing everybody, because if lawsuits like this start to proliferate, I would have to think twice about like having guests on my show, because I was mentioning this before, before you came in, but I don't know if the podcast got named in this lawsuit because I couldn't get a look at the lawsuit because, God, first rule of journalism, if you're going to write a story about a lawsuit, give us a link to the damn lawsuit, please. Like, it drives me crazy when outlets do this.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Let me read the lawsuit that you're talking about. But anyway, so I don't know if the podcast got named as a defendant, but I imagine they could have.
Right.
And so if I am, if this is a reality where like, a guest I have on the show says something that gets somebody else mad, I could get thrown into a lawsuit and I have to defend it. Suddenly, do I have to start getting like liability insurance? Do I have to start making my guests sign indemnifications? Like that's going to be the end of podcasting.
Yeah, no, I know. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. People have to chill out. They literally have to chill out and move on.
Could not have said that better myself. I know you had a lot of stuff to say about, you want to talk about the Oscars and things like that. Unfortunately, I think we're kind of up against it.
That's cool, man.
We'll leave it there. Let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to be joined by our guest, Brittany Perry, in the second segment. I'm excited to talk to her. She's got a cool platform. She's super experienced, has worked in publishing for a long time. We're going to get some great insight from her. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Keep checking out Break the Business. Presented in cooperation with Ryan A. Kairalla, PA. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA is a law firm providing transactional entertainment legal services, including contracts, business formation, commercial law, copyright, trademark, and more. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA, Miami, Florida. rkpalaw.com.
Streaming services for Break the Business provided by LEK Entertainment. LEK Entertainment is a full-service entertainment company offering everything from consultations to full-scale events and productions, including audio and video productions, voiceovers, staged theatrical productions, script and music development, and streaming services. For more information, visit lekentertainment.com. LEK Entertainment wants to help you bring your story to life.
Thanks for supporting Break the Business. If you have a question or topic that you want us to discuss, email us at breakthebusiness@gmail.com. You can follow the host, that's me, on Twitter at Ryan Kair, and you can follow the show at the BTB Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and on all major podcasts. And now, let's get back to the show. Whoa, hang on. There we go. Welcome back to Break the Business, everybody. Ryan Kairalla here with Gideon King. I sure hope we're still on the air. Gideon, you there?
I'm here, man. Can you hear me?
Okay, I've got some audio issues again. I don't know what's going on this week. Thank you all for checking out Break the Business, wherever you do it, by the way, because I know there's an increasing number of places where you can check out this program. And if you found one of them, thank you for that. You can check us out on all major podcast platforms, on Twitch, Facebook, Sorry, not Facebook anymore. Twitch, YouTube, and volume.com, and on SiriusXM 145. Wherever you're checking us out, we're so glad that you are. Thank you for being a part of this community, and thank you in advance for telling a friend. Let's go ahead and bring out our guest this week. She is the CEO and founder of Gateless, a music technology company that serves as a centralized A&R platform and creative marketplace for music professionals. Our guest has previously served at Sony Music Publishing in Warner Chappell, and also currently operates the Et al. Music administration platform. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting g8list.com. Get it? Gateless. g8list.com. We are happy to welcome Brittany Perry on to Break the Business. Hello, Brittany.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me tonight. This is super cool.
It is super cool. See, Gideon, her mic works fine.
That's just
no problem.
This is just proof that you're out to get me.
That's
just
funny.
proof.
That's because, Brittany is a professional, and she always has been. She's worn so many hats in the industry. She's worked with, some of the biggest names around, and, excited to get her perspective on this. Want to just get right into it here. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you've described music catalogs, because you use a term for music catalogs that I would definitely agree with. You have described music catalogs as often being, quote, black holes, where there's lots of great songs out there, but they're not getting found by the people who could potentially collaborate on those songs and make them hits. Why do we have black holes in our music catalogs?
I think it's just the nature of the industry in terms of, like I remember when I first discovered what A&R was, because I never wanted to be in the music industry, but I just remember when, I don't want to be like, once you're in, but, you just hear just different things in terms of like, oh, we're unicorns, we're the lucky ones, we're et cetera, et cetera. And, just in terms of just realizing it's those type of notions that are essentially, when I say notions, I'm meaning gatekeepers that ultimately want to be a part of things or need to feel as though they have to be in the middle or to dot connect correctly. And it's just more so realizing this industry is just so dated when it comes to technology, and respectfully to my peers, enough is enough. And ultimately, we can pull the reins on, protecting the industry and creativity from AI, but I don't want to say now or never, but truly now or never.
Well, I have often heard music executives say the problem is almost the opposite. I can't tell you how many music people I talk to that say there's just not enough hits out there. We have all this music, but I don't hear enough hits. And it sounds like you have the opposite view, which is we're not hurting for hits. The hits are out there. We're just having trouble finding them and finding ways for them to get connected to the people who can help make them into hits.
Yes. And it was just more so, I feel like realizing, because I took UCLA's music publishing and business law extension course, just so I could truly understand what music publishing is. And it's more so realizing, in terms of just maximizing, the catalogs that these publishers have the license to, I've realized in terms of, certain processes, especially when it comes to dealing with pop music and, essentially the whole acquisition in regards to literally popular music, it's more so just realizing that, it's, like I said, being a publisher, there's so many more hits that I know that are just essentially stuck on hard drives. And because I focus specifically on working with the songwriters and helping coming up with strategy, I'm always essentially being pulled into different directions with various writers in terms of, hey, can you help me essentially go through my music and find out, find different homes for where this music could go with the various artists. And, like you said, everybody's always looking for a hit. And that's just always the norm of what I'm used to hearing. But then, I remember when I was at Sony, I was just starting to get burned out and feeling overstretched like an octopus in terms of writers want me to help them and Sony wants me to just focus on acquisition. It's just more so realizing, hey, I can't essentially help everyone, but what could? And I immediately thought of technology in terms of, hey, I remember telling John Platt at Sony, I was like, hey, there's over 18,000 active catalogs here. and roughly like 30 A&Rs in North America, like respectfully, the math doesn't math. Ultimately, like how can we maximize exposure for all of these catalogs plus focus on acquisition? And like I said, just realizing that there was this need early on, because my master's is in HR management from USC. And it was more so realizing, like, when I was at Warner Chappell, I had no clue what music publishing was. So it's just more so like going to the studios, and then, writer would say, oh, I made this song. And I'm like, oh, I love that song. Or when I was a DJ in college, like, I played that song, like, people love that. And they're like, oh, if you love that, then wait till you hear this. And I, tell people I always felt like Alice in Wonderland in terms of just falling into the wonderful world of unreleased music. And, I say by 2020, and that was about 2018. So by 2023, I felt like, well, post pandemic, I felt like a mad woman in terms of I don't like to essentially feel as though I'm one of the only ones that can access this world. And especially with the decline in music, like, there's been so many publications essentially making little notes or essentially putting the data together to show that there's a whole story going on in terms of where did the hits go, when, like I said, I know that they're stuck on hard drives. So it's just more so finding a way for the creative ecosystem to thrive.
So
it's
yeah, go
oh, I'm
ahead.
sorry, Ryan. It's something. It makes me think about another thing, which is similar, Brittany. So I release music, and I never know what's going to happen every time. Sometimes you get a lot of streams, and sometimes you think your best song, you think you have a great song, and it literally goes nowhere.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed also is that, unlike in baseball, when you can like come up from the minor leagues, play in the pros, go back down to the minor leagues, but you might still come back up and have a decent career. Once a song doesn't do well initially on Spotify, it like goes into like the frozen fruit section of like music, and
The
like
Kodiak Alaska.
and yeah, exactly. And it's like I call my manager, I call, some playlisting dude, and I say, like, can we like reissue this? It's a great song. And it's dead. It's just dead. So like I would almost add on to what you're saying, that on a hard drive somewhere, I certainly have a bunch of unreleased stuff. People have unreleased stuff, and there are some gems in there. But I would even go further and say that something about Spotify and streaming platforms is sort of feast or famine right away. And if it's famine initially, it's famine forever. And that is something that deeply frustrates me. I have 2 songs that I've written that I'm super proud of, that I love. I just know what they are. And other people, I mean, one of the biggest producers in the world said, this is my favorite song I've heard in 30 years. He was a producer, James Brown, and all these. And I went to my manager, and then went to Spotify and the playlisting guy was like, yeah, dude, like, no chance. Like, we already did it. So I'm just sort of saying that's almost another problem in a way.
No, it is. And it's, it's interesting because then you hear through the woodworks that there's various, I don't want to say algorithm guys, but like how you said, it didn't go anywhere. You didn't hear it from me, but there are people out there that's like, oh, really? For a fee, we can fix that really quickly. Again, I'm not saying that's for Spotify. I'm just saying, for general apps that make the world go around. So that's why, it's unfortunate. However, I've always like hated hearing people say, oh, the music industry is dead, music's dead, et cetera, et cetera. And especially, you've heard that in recent years, and, various publications, podcasts have discussed, what happened to music, what happened to, hearing from my favorite artist, or whatever happened to that artist. They were cool. It's like this huge purgatory limbo bubble, like, all put together in terms of this ecosystem is like, it's like the trickle down isn't trickling down. And ultimately, I make the argument that we've essentially allowed a huge gap from a standpoint of like AI. Like, I describe AI in the music industry like Independence Day. So like the movie when the aliens just came into the sky. It's more so, just realizing that there are some of these AI companies that want to essentially use the unreleased production that's stuck on hard drives and influence the model to essentially profit off the fans who miss the music as well. And it's more so, hey, if you miss the music, essentially become a musician and make it yourself. And again, respectfully, especially as someone so close to, I would say, the nucleus of music, it's just more so realizing, no, 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 no. Because, just my love for people, love for sociology, songwriters have always gotten the short end of everything. And especially with how, this is a mafia based industry historically, and just how the contracts can work, essentially, if you can get somebody to sign a random janky contract, unfortunately, they'll sign it. And now you can essentially own the rights, like everything. Like we've heard the horror stories. And it's just more so, like I said, in terms of the writers, I've always seen, and I understand them in terms of playing the game, and because they're not being nonchalant, they're just essentially trying to make sure that they can still have opportunity each day. However, I like I said, just realizing a lot of them have the same processes of they'll make incredible music, they'll collaborate, they'll put it on their hard drive, but unfortunately, unless they don't have a team around them or the proper channels to dot connect, that music just sits on hard drives. And, I just thought it was interesting that USC came up with a study, I believe it was 2022. The Annenberg School, they do a usual study, an annual study on the music industry every year. But that year they did a focus on recording in the music studio, a conversation on gender and race. And, regardless of race or gender, they analyzed 900 songs on the Hot 100 from 2012 to 2020. And, think about how the Hot 100 works. And especially, Ryan, you're an attorney. If somebody has a credit on the Hot 100, most likely they have a host of publishers reaching out, looking to sign them, work with them, etc. And it's more so, I just always thought it was interesting because that study analyzed songwriters at an individual level, like everybody. And the only thing that they had in common was that they were only going to be on the Hot 100 list once. And then like fewer than 6%, had at least 2 or more entries during that same time period. Now think about how average pub deals are typically, 3 years. The fact that over 900 songwriters couldn't essentially release music, and I'll say pause, because when they're on the Hot 100, in my eyes, from a sociological lens, you know how to make music for the masses. You know how to make music that resonates with the masses. Yeah. So I look at it as like a flame. It's like if we lit a candle and then we blow it out, we light it again, it's going to light pretty fast. And, it's just like a notion of if you've done it before, you most likely can do it again. But I feel as though just so many factors in terms of, if you're on the Hot 100, if you're going to sign, just the negotiation process can take forever. And, you're all excited by the time it gets done, you're all excited to work, et cetera, et cetera. And then you slowly realize how the industry works in terms of, some publishers operate as acquisition factories, which again, like that's no shade or anything. However, in terms of what a publisher's role is, and I'm not saying as an A&R individual, I'm saying what an actual publishing company's role is to maximize, opportunities for essentially the productions that they have the license to, which, yes, you can, and I'm not laughing because I'm sorry. It's just funny to me because it's just more so like sometimes people are like, well, people are generating royalties, they're getting advances, they're being put in the camps, like they're working. But it's more so, I remember this whole thing of there was like royalty transparency was like a big thing a few years ago. And, for me, I always thought, okay, yes, we can have transparency when it comes to royalties, whether it's an app, whether it's software, etc. However, reminding that songwriter that they essentially only have one major release and not helping them secure additional opportunities. Like, again, would you check that bank account often? I'm not saying that you wouldn't, but just sure. From that mindset. Yeah. So it's just more so, like I said, realizing we can't glorify being a publishing A&R respectfully, like, because there's not going to be enough talent bandwidth to essentially be able to support all of the catalogs that exist out there. And that's why, once I realized that, oh my gosh, there at certain companies, there are thousands and thousands of writers signed. that's when, like I said, there has to be a technological solution. Because again, if hits aren't being explored, considered, and it doesn't even have to be hits, it could just be undeniable production. You could think about how an artist works in the studio. Like they may just want to switch it up for the night and just, go along with different flows or find new ideas or a different flow that their fan base never thought that they would go down. And it's just more so, this decline, like I said, the trickle down is so huge that ultimately I think the industry is leaving billions of dollars on the table. And go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, that's a pretty astute laying out of the problem. So you're talking about you have a bunch of hits that are sitting on hard drives. They can't get connected to people who could do things with those hits. Further compounding the fact is the people who should be in charge of kind of connecting the hit makers together, the A&R people. There's not very many of them, right? Like that creates a bottleneck. There's 36 of these people around the country that are supposed to connect these billions of songs together, and that's gonna not work.
Or they could have over 100 plus writers on their roster. Like again, not like they don't. It the balancing of allowing them to be a human, balance their career, but then balancing acquisition. Again, like I said, the math doesn't math. Hence, where we are creatively. Go ahead.
Yeah. So where we are is, we have an old school, a problem that's being created by an old school structure. And your position is that tech is the solution to this, and particularly in the form of your platform, Gateless. So how does Gateless endeavor to solve this problem?
Yes. So ultimately, it was built off the needs of songwriters, just like I said, collective needs of, oh, I need this, and I would love to essentially have this. And even on the platform, we have a built-in ledger. So songwriters feel safe enough to essentially put their best ideas on the platform for other artists to essentially consider. But essentially, Gateless operates as a creative workspace built for, executives and artists within the industry. So it's more so, originally we were enterprise software because it's just, you just hear word of mouth, different A&Rs, different companies. Oh, I need a hit. And then, it's just more so, okay, you built the enterprise software, but then you just realize the turning tide in terms of genre focus and, constant layoffs, and ultimately realizing, if those executives are in the building and they're not focusing on the genres, many artists, especially pop artists, will most likely won't be slated for release. And again, essentially just that last approval process of having to go along with the building's structure is just more so, for me, I was originally hesitant at putting indie artists on the platform because I've always heard so many writers always say like, no budget, no bops, like we're not working for free. Like, they have to have budget, et cetera, et cetera. But then it just dawned on me because I remember hearing Lizzo say, I think in one of her Instagram videos, and she had said, like if you're an indie artist, you are in prime position to maximize your career if you drop a hit right now, or if you have, incredible music, like, in your inventory, just from a standpoint of, you don't have to wait for a release schedule. And for me, I feel like the psychology in terms of the inspiration process, like that's key because, it's like the first 3 to 5 seconds. Like if you're listening to new ideas, like you're in a studio and you tell the engineer, hey, pull up some new ideas, let's go through them. And, they're pressing play. Ultimately, within the first 3 to 5 seconds of a track, or a loop, essentially that's what draws you in. And it's more so, if it's a loop, the producer, it's like, okay, yeah, this is cool. Okay, they start adding their sauce to it. But then let's say if it's a track, ultimately the first 3 to 5 seconds, that blows the artist away. It's like, okay, cool. But if they're in a session, now the writer can essentially start to come up with melodies. The artist can start to, come up with their lyrics, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just more so, I realized the importance of when certain production makes you feel some type of way, it turns into like a production system in terms of, like I said, everybody's adding their sauce to truly bring it to life. And it's more so, as a publisher, I realized if you understand people's strengths in terms of creative chemistry, I feel like a chemist, like, oh my gosh, putting them here and there and all that together, like, oh my gosh, it's going to be so beautiful, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I realized, like artists need to stay inspired. And I feel as though not many people realize that's like, I don't want to say a big part of their day to day, but ultimately, like, in terms of how Gateless fixes the bigger issue, it's more so there to, like, even post pandemic, many artists essentially build their own studios at home, on the road. And like I said, in terms of them feeling inspired, they shouldn't have to post on social media, hey, here's my email, send me some packs, and then the email gets flooded, or they have to wait for middlemen or wait for their A&Rs to remember them. And again, no shade to executives. They're just super busy with meetings, traveling, shows, dinner, whatever, and plus acquisition. Go ahead.
But Brittany, don't you think that, I mean, on the one hand, we're talking about unheard hits in hard drives. But on the other hand, the number of releases every day on Spotify is staggering. So isn't there too much music being released at this point? So how do you square that up with what you're saying?
Yes. So ultimately, I have seen reports on that in terms of there's that, like you said, thousands. Like I've seen like, oh, like I think it said Deezer had like over 60,000 AI tracks like uploaded a day.
Right.
And in my eyes, again, I see that as respectfully the fans attempting to make the music that they miss. And essentially, if we pull the reins and do what we need to do as an industry, we can go back to essentially allowing the trickle down effect to happen. Like again, like how you said earlier in terms of, oh, it didn't go anywhere in terms of your music or the reach, etc. People can upload tracks to DSPs, well, not DSPs, but they can upload tracks to distribution companies all day. But again, if nothing stands out about it or nothing's remarkable, it'll just essentially just stay where it's at. But the music that I know that exists in terms of, like, if this is what you can't see my hand. This is what the public hears. And then up here is like, well, no, all the way up here is like what's stuck on hard drives. The public wants access to what's stuck on hard drives. And, like I said, we have these companies that essentially embrace the fan to make the music. But again, there's already writers that, like I said, they're sitting on this music. They just essentially need an outlet. And unfortunately, this industry, I feel as though, is stuck on, oh, you have to sign to my management company. You have to sign to, this, et cetera, for me to doc connect and help. When as an executive, I remember sitting in my office and, a writer could come in and say, oh, I've been signed here for 10 plus years. And, like now I'm on your roster. And I'm like, okay, play me what you've been working on or what you're sitting on. And they would play some of the most incredible music that I'm like, why have you been stuck in this deal for 10 plus years? Like, why is this still stuck on hard drives? And, again, I had to learn the hard way in terms of burning out. Like, I can't help everyone. However, like I said, if there was technology in which people can essentially audition for opportunities, which essentially how Gateless is set up, we're very mindful of how musicians work, especially songwriters, in terms of they're very protective of their art. They don't want anybody to be able to see it or get inspired by it, which some of our competitors essentially have more public leaning interfaces. And hence why, on ours, like I said, it's a secure database. But then two, we also have the built-in ledger there. So, and it's very sensitive in terms of, like I said, if somebody's going through the database and they press play and they're like, oh, what was that? Play it back again. And then they play it again. Like each time it press play, document it. The timestamp, who, IP address, date and time. And even if they pressed it like 55 times, at least now songwriters can essentially have that proof to send to their attorney to show that one, they were a part of the inspiration process, but then two, in the event that there's a release that, occurs, especially like I said, if an indie artist comes on and tries to be clever and, essentially tries to replicate the sound, they can actually still show that, hey, I was a part of the inspiration process, or I essentially deserve credit because they got influenced by my idea. Like I have the proof right here. Which again, especially Ryan, as you were saying earlier, nobody likes being sued. Just a litigation process from what I hear in entertainment can start at like $20K minimum. And I feel like attorneys are quick to refer you out. And again, to try to minimize those headaches creatively, we essentially just, like I said, created an outlet and when I say for music to be competitive, I already know it's competitive, but more so, I want it to be Battle of the Bands competitive, to where everybody is more inspired from a standpoint of, oh, Ryan, like you released that. Oh my God, bro, that blew my mind. Like, I see why you won Grammy, like Song of the Year award, bro. Like, that was different, and because I say like that all helps the creative process, but if it's the same, like I said, the current system is more so align yourself with the proper channels if you can, or if you have that reach just to get opportunity. When, like I said, essentially, especially in this, I would say this current society, not even just like this administration, the world in general, just how it's affecting the world, many people are willing to pay for escapism. And, it's just realizing that, especially when it comes to music, like I said, we're just leaving billions on the table. And, in terms of just the bigger picture, like, yes, everybody loves profitability, and you've heard in the industry before, like, oh, just go along with it. Like, you'll get your money, etc. Well, the money has essentially stopped going around. But the only thing that can regenerate it, and because let me stop right there. I'm like, because I feel like sometimes when I say that, like people get like nervous, like if I'm telling them they have cancer, but it's actually reversible. And it's more so, like I said, in terms of, allowing creatives to just collaborate without trying to be the middleman or the middle woman, that sort of approach, like I said, I feel as though, especially with indie artists, they'll kickstart the necessary reboot for this industry, just so, well, I feel like eventually word of mouth, but if signed artists are realizing, hey, indie acts can essentially search for their next hit, but we still have to rely on A&Rs, what's going on, I feel as though it'll make music just even greater, because undeniable music hits, the trickle down in terms of feeding camps, teams, the marketing rollout, the efforts, all of that will essentially be more organic, versus if, there was, executives at labels that are essentially trying to push music that ultimately may be viral or, might not be as good, but it's their job just to essentially push it, versus if, they have a hit and it's like, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could, get an ice cream truck, we could go to Miami, we could do this, just in terms of the, maximizing exposure for it. But, like I said, the one thing that I've just realized as a publisher is that hits, undeniable music grows catalogs. And unfortunately, we're in a time where, yes, people are excited about catalog acquisition, but I would say 95% of musicians are not anywhere close to where they would feel comfortable to sell their catalog. However, I've realized most musicians are unfortunately facing catalog stagnation. And that's been normalized so much to where, we have, like I said, we have AI coming in like the aliens and ultimately trying to keep the fans entertained and keeping their models influenced. However, like I said, I just really love this revolution that writers are, essentially not just playing the game, and they're standing up and saying like, no, we're not going for, influencing your model, because they already get screwed over as is. And doing that will just be flushing $1 billion industry down the drain. And they learn from Spotify, respectfully.
Forgive me, Brittany. Let me leave it there, just because we're about to lose radio. But love the perspective, and I love the idea of technology being able to create these like real ecosystems where these hits can proliferate and do so without gatekeepers in the old industry models. Love that. Our guest has been Brittany Perry, the CEO and founder of Gateless. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting Gateless, G8list.com. Brittany, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for your time, and wish you all the best. And don't be a stranger. Love to have you on again real soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been a thrill. Our thanks to Brittany Perry and Gideon King. Thanks to producer Abigail. And thanks to all of you for checking out Break the Business. We'll see you next week.